I never believed in haunted houses. At least, not until I moved into the one my late uncle left me. A sprawling Victorian relic perched above the cliffs of Marrow Point, where the sea beats itself against the rocks like it's trying to remember a rhythm it once knew. The locals called it the Hallway House. They said it was built wrong, that its rooms were off by inches, and its corridors led nowhere. But the will was clear. It was mine now. And after a life of renting small, soulless apartments, I wanted roots, even if they were tangled. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start to hear your own pulse. The air smelled of iron and dust, like an attic after a thunderstorm. I explored every room with a flashlight, tracing the outlines of old furniture shrouded in sheets. Everything felt frozen, untouched since the day my uncle died. Then I found the hallway. It was at the far end of the upper floor, long, narrow, and sealed at both ends by heavy oak doors. Each had a tarnished lock and a single brass keyhole, but no keys to fit them. The floorboards were smoother than anywhere else in the house, as if hundreds of feet had passed through, pacing, turning, pacing again. And there, etched faintly into the wood near the baseboard, were words scratched by a shaky hand. "Do not stay after midnight." I should have listened. The first night, the sounds began. Soft at first, a creak, a sigh, the murmur of old wood. Then clearer, sharper. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced, echoing from behind those locked doors. I froze, counting them without meaning to. 12 steps forward. Pause. 12 steps back. I held my breath. They stopped the second I moved. I told myself it was the house settling. Or maybe the sea wind squeezing through the cracks. But the sound came again, the same rhythm, same direction, same pause. Like someone pacing in frustration, trapped behind the wall. I pressed my ear to the door. There was nothing but a faint vibration. Not noise, not even a hum. It felt alive. The next day, I searched for explanations. The wiring was old but functional, no hidden speakers, no loose beams. The security system had been disabled for years. But at the far edge of the attic, beneath a pile of warped boards, I found something odd, a narrow ventilation shaft running parallel to that hallway. It was sealed with rusted screws, but one side was newer, shinier, as if it had been opened recently. That night, I recorded the sound on my phone. At 2:14 a.m., right on cue, the footsteps began again. The recording caught something I hadn't heard with my ears. A faint whisper riding beneath the steps. Slowed down, it almost sounded like breathing. But there was something else hidden in the noise, a distorted voice repeating a word I couldn't quite make out. I played it back again and again until the word started to form itself in my head. Even if I couldn't hear it clearly, it wasn't just random static. It was calling. Hook. Before I tell you what that word was, and why it still echoes in my head every night, make sure you're subscribed. Because after this, there's no turning back. For the next 3 nights, I tried to ignore the noise. I told myself the floorboards were warped, that old houses made sounds to remind you they were still standing. But lies wear thin when you can feel the air move with every step. At 2:14 a.m., always the same time, I woke to the sound again. 12 footsteps. Pause. 12 back. I tried recording it, like before, but the sound never came through the same way twice. The microphone caught something my ears couldn't. A low, rhythmic vibration, almost like breathing. That night, I stood at the end of the hallway holding my phone as a flashlight. The oak doors loomed ahead, one on each side, both locked. I pressed my palm to the closer one. The wood was cold. Too cold. But under that icy stillness, I felt it. A faint pulse, like the heartbeat of something buried deep inside. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. But the air thickened, heavy enough to taste. Then came the knock. Soft. Deliberate. From the other side. Once. Twice. 3 times. The sound wasn't violent. It was worse than that. It was patient. The next morning, I tore through the house for anything that could explain it. In the basement, behind the water heater, I found something odd, an old breaker box that didn't connect to any wires in the house. The metal plate was labeled hallway lighting, but the switches were off, and the bulbs in that corridor hadn't worked since I arrived. I flipped the main switch anyway. Instantly, I heard a faint hum from above. The air vents rattled, and something inside the walls began to move, not crawling, not skittering, but shifting, as if the house itself had inhaled. I ran upstairs. The hallway light was on. Just one bulb, flickering weakly near the ceiling, but enough to reveal something new. Along the wallpaper, hidden beneath decades of dust, were faint dark stains, footprints. Human, barefoot, pressed into the wall as if someone had walked horizontally across it. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. For a moment, I thought I saw movement. The outline of a hand pressing against the other side of the wallpaper stretching, straining, breathing. Then just as quickly it flattened again. That night, the steps began earlier, 1:47 a.m. this time. Louder. Faster. I stayed awake, clutching a kitchen knife I knew would be useless. And then the pacing stopped. Total silence. When I finally dared to look down the hall, I saw something that shouldn't have been possible. A sliver of light leaking from under the locked door. It glowed like a heartbeat, fading in and out, slow, steady. I crept closer until I could hear the faintest whisper from inside. A woman's voice. My name. Rehook. Tomorrow, I'll tell you what happened when I finally opened that door. And why I wish I never did. I don't remember deciding to open it. I remember the sound of my own breath, shallow and trembling, and the way the knife slipped in my sweaty hand. But the decision, that was instinct or madness or both. The air in the hallway was wrong that night. Too still, like everything in the house was holding its breath with me. The bulb above my head flickered twice, then steadied. The faint light under the door pulsed in rhythm with my heart. I reached out. The lock turned with a click far too gentle for how long it had been sealed. When the door opened, the air that escaped was warm, alive, almost human. It smelled faintly of salt, metal, and something sweet, like old perfume. The room beyond was small, windowless, lit by a single hanging bulb that swung gently on its wire. Dust shimmered in the light, swirling like it was breathing too. There was nothing inside but a wooden chair facing the wall, and behind it a mirror. Not just any mirror. The frame was ornate, carved from dark oak, and the glass had aged to a dull gray. But when I looked into it, the reflection wasn't right. My body was there, my outline, but my face lagged behind. Half a second too slow. Then it smiled. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe hard enough to leave a bruise. My reflection didn't mimic the motion. It just sat there in that awful chair, grinning like it knew something I didn't. The light flickered again, and for a split second, I saw something behind my mirrored self, a tall, thin shadow, standing just beyond reach. When the bulb steadied, the reflection was normal again. My own pale, terrified face staring back. But etched into the surface of the mirror now, clear as blood on glass, were words that hadn't been there before. Welcome back. I ran. Down the hall, down the stairs, nearly tripping over the runner rug. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the cold sea air. The waves were black under the moonlight, and for a moment, I thought I could still hear footsteps inside the house, running now fast, as if chasing me to the door. I called the sheriff the next morning. He arrived with a deputy, half bored, half curious, and together we checked every inch of that hallway. The room was still there, the chair still facing the mirror. But when the sheriff looked into the glass, it was empty. No reflection at all. Just a dull, dark surface that swallowed the light. He shrugged it off. Old glass does that. Probably mercury backing. But as he turned to leave, I saw his expression change, just slightly. He wiped something off his sleeve. A faint gray dust like ash. That night, I tried to sleep with the door to my room locked. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong in any normal house. A faint scraping, like metal on wood. I turned on my lamp and froze. The chair from that hidden room was now standing in the corner of my bedroom. And in the mirror above my dresser, the reflection wasn't mine. Rehook, you think you'd run. You think you'd leave everything behind. But when the house knows your name, there's nowhere left to go. By the fourth night, I stopped pretending I was only hearing the house settle. Old timber does groan. Copper pipes do ping. Wind does turn eaves into reed flutes. I knew the facts because I'd forced them into a neat list, the kind that steadies your hands when you want to call someone who can't be called anymore. But lists can't explain measured steps that pause outside a locked door you can see from your bed. They can't explain the way silence behaves like a living thing, backing away when I stared, creeping forward when I blinked. I decided to make the house answer me. Not with a seance or a midnight dare. That's not my shape. I approached it like the journalist I used to be, armed with light, record, and pattern. I pushed my dresser to the hall-facing wall and marked the floorboards with pencil ticks, the way surveyors notch grade on stakes. I set my phone to continuous audio and placed it on a stack of books just inside the hallway, screen dark, mic hot. I taped a hair across the brass keyhole of the locked door. A trick I learned covering a labor scandal years ago, so I'd know if even a breath disturbed it. Then I sat on the bed and kept watch with the patience I've earned from long wards and longer nights. The house held its breath. It was the kind of quiet that turns your body into a chambered instrument, making your own pulse too loud. Somewhere a clock forgot to tick. A draft found the seam at my ankle. When the steps came, they did not creep. They arrived. Heel-toe, a cadence that suggested weight and certainty and a habit of returning. They crossed the far end of the corridor, paused at the radiator where the wood dips, then resumed. I felt the vibration through the dresser. The pencil ticks quivered. The steps halted at the locked door. One more shift of weight, a human repositioning. And then the sound I dreaded and craved. A slow exhale, too steady to be wind, too focused to be plumbing. It threaded through the keyhole hair, which remained unbroken, and coiled beneath my ribs. I did not speak. The rules I'd set myself were clear: observe, record, correlate. I let the moment pass like a wave that wants to break, but doesn't find shore. When it ebbed, the house returned to its careful stillness, and I to mine. At dawn I checked the audio. The waveform trembled exactly where my bones remembered. Measured peaks at 12-second intervals, breathing, or a radiator burp with uncanny timing. I filtered the file, removed the room tone, boosted the low frequency. What surfaced was a texture I couldn't assign to mechanism. A soft scraping before each exhale, like cloth tightening against a buckle, like a palm adjusting on paint. Curiosity pushes you to rational detours. Mine led to the basement. Old houses tell their truest stories from underneath. With a flashlight and a dust mask, I moved past the washer to the main beam and mapped the joists above. Sound rides would like a violin ride's resonance. A footfall here can bloom over there. I paced the span below the locked hall and found fingerprints of age, sistered joists, a steel plate over a split, vintage knob and tube insulators abandoned like bone buttons. Then I saw something that didn't belong to the century that built this place. A fresh conduit for a camera wire, stapled too neatly, too recently. It rose from the breaker panel and vanished into the joist bay beneath the locked corridor. I traced it up the back stairs to a linen closet whose rear panel had been replaced. New screws still showing the star of the driver bit. The wood around them was untouched by paint drips, the mark of a late job hurried through. I pressed my ear to the panel. Nothing but my breath and the thudding skepticism of a heart that wants proof. I returned to the hall with a screwdriver and the knowledge that this was no longer about superstition. As the afternoon cooled the plaster, I lifted the linen shelves, backed out the screws, and eased away the panel. Behind it, a shallow crawl cavity, dark, close, lined with old lath and a newer strand of cable snaking toward the locked door's casing. My flashlight caught a glint. A coin? No, an eyelet screwed into the header above the door. Not decorative. Functional. Something had been threaded there. A guide. A line. I reached in and drew the cable toward me. It resisted with the stubbornness of a thing that has been given a purpose. The sheath was stamped with a model number. I recognized the brand. Security grade. I followed it through the cavity to a junction box tucked low, behind a stud. Inside a splitter. Two lines diverged. One toward the front of the house, one toward the locked door. Surveillance. Of what? Of whom? Rehook. You think you know a house because you can list its rooms. You don't. You know a house when you find the decisions it hides. I closed the panel and stared at the door until daylight thinned to that anxious gray blue. If there was a camera, there might also be a recorder. If there was a recorder, there might be months, years, of answers spooled in plastic. If there were answers, they might not be the answers I wanted. Wanting, I've learned, is how you walk yourself willingly into certain kinds of pain. Night returned with formal precision. I set 2 phones recording this time, one in the hall, one in the linen closet cavity with the panel propped off by a book. I placed a glass of water on the floorboards midway down the corridor. Water tells truths about vibration that microphones sometimes miss. Then I sat and I waited, a sentinel in socks with a notebook ready for timestamps. The steps began earlier, as if whatever wrote the house's schedule had decided to move the chapter forward. Hail to. Pause. Hail to. Closer than before, without the hesitation of previous nights. A path learned, a route owned. At the midpoint, the water dimpled inward, then lapped the rim. The dresser whispered against the wall. The steps reached the door and stopped. Not silence, the negative of sound, a waiting that felt like a held question. Then came a new element, tiny and decisive. The clink of metal on metal. Not jangling. Contact. A key greeting a plate, or a ring tapping a latch. My mind made a quick cruel jump to a hospital bed, where I learned what machines sound like when they take over breathing. I dragged it back. Focus. Catalog. The hair over the keyhole lay still. The latch did not retract. The door did not open. But the idea of opening moved into the room like weather. I slept badly and briefly, the way you sleep next to an email you shouldn't send. At first light I pulled the audio and with trembling fingers, scrubbed to the clink. Amplified, it became 2 notes. A high tick, a low kiss, separated by less than a second. A deliberate touch followed by a deliberate withdrawal. Not a ghost. Not the building. An actor at a threshold. I wanted to call someone to say the sentence I had not allowed myself. There is someone in this house with me at night. But proof matters. Proof protects you from becoming the story other people tell at parties about the woman who let grief rewire her hearing. So I pursued the other line of the splitter, the one that ran toward the front of the house, and found where it ended. In a shallow attic space above the porch, inside a locked plywood box screwed to a rafter. Someone had wanted this hard to access but not impossible. Someone who planned to come back. The padlock was new, cheap, the kind sold at hardware stores to people who believe locks are about keeping things out instead of logging who tries to get in. I didn't have a bolt cutter. I had a hammer and an urgency that finally outweighed caution. 2 strikes on the shackle, a leverage twist with the claw, and the lock surrendered. Inside sat a compact NVR, network video recorder. Its status light dark but its presence loud. A portable battery bank rested beside it. A drive was slotted in, labeled in tidy block letters with a date range that stopped 2 months before my husband died. Rehook. When you ask a house to answer you, be prepared to accept that it might do so in his handwriting. I didn't press play. Not yet. The thing about answers is they don't just end the question. They end the version of you who needed the question. I closed the box, carried it downstairs, and set it on the table under the soft pool of a lamp that had belonged to my mother. I made coffee strong enough to steady surgeons, and watched the steam rise in disciplined spirals. The footsteps returned that night. Of course they did. Truth doesn't wait until you feel ready to meet it. It makes appointments and expects you to show up. I set the recorder to clone the drive. I set my back against the door. I set my breath to a pace that would not betray me. And with the house as my witness, I decided that tomorrow I would break the other lock. I slept for 2 hours on a chair, the recorder on my lap and the unopened drive box beside my elbow like a dangerous heirloom. Morning arrived pale and patient. Rain had washed the street to pewter. The house smelled of damp plaster and coffee. I made another pot, the kind that pulls me back into time, my father's ritual, because rituals anchor you when the ground feels like it might give. I did not call anyone. Not Thomas. Not the old college friend who still answered at odd hours. The recorder was private evidence, and evidence behaves differently when it passes through another pair of hands. It gains context. It gains motives. It can become an accusation dressed in someone else's suit. Instead, I open the drive. There are small ways to betray yourself that feel briefly like courage. Clicking play on a file recorded in someone else's living room is one of them. The interface showed 52 clips, each stamped with a time. Late nights, some just past midnight, some at 3:12 a.m., A handful in the small hours of Sunday that overlapped with the Sunday mornings we'd always spent at church. Empty pews, empty coffee cups. The first dozen were static and street noise. Then a clip, short, 9 seconds. And a shape in the video that was almost nothing. A shadow moving just beyond the doorframe of the locked hall. The camera's exposure was low. The silhouette resolved into a person when you squinted like an eye made of will. I scrubbed forward. The footage pattern repeated. The figure moved with a practiced economy, stopping at the same point near the radiator. A hand brushed the wall. A soft metallic sound, pocket change or a latch, registered. On the 20th clip, the silhouette paused directly beneath the camera and lifted an object to the wall. A small panel unlatched, a hand reached in, and a folded paper was extracted. The hand sealed the panel again with care. My body remembered the way James used to fold notes. Crisp, diagonal corners meeting with a surgeon's precision. Confirmation feels like comfort until it doesn't. I worked my way through the files and found a file name that, when highlighted, crawled like a lit fuse. July 18 private.mp4. July 18th. I knew that date. It was a Tuesday the year before he had the surgery that changed everything. He'd been irritable that week, a briefness in his voice. I chalked it up to a case deadline. I had no memory of a secret threaded through our walls. I watched with an attention that felt like prescience. The figure moved with confidence, not a thief's jitter, but someone who belonged by habit to the shadows of the house. The camera panned as if to follow a ritual. Sheets of paper were smoothed on a table, a pen scraped across margins, a small box clicked shut. The person, female, from the silhouette and the cadence of movement, ran fingers through hair, folded the design and tucked it inside a cheap tin marked with a children's brand. Then she smoothed the tin into the cavity behind the panel and pushed it home with a thumb that left a faint grease mark on the wood. The file ended. The screen was a rectangle of trivial light. My hands shook. I called Thomas. His voice on the other end had that professional calm that only comes from coaching nerves into submission. "I thought you'd be calling me," he said. "No judgment. Just an inventory." "Where are you?" "Home," I said. "Do not let anyone into the house." "No one," he said bluntly. "Do you have the drive?" "Yes." "Good. Don't spread those clips." "Not yet. I'll come by with a forensic tech in 3 hours." "Lock the porch, no matter how ridiculous it feels. Women who leave doors unlocked get second lines of trouble." He had a way of framing things as logistical problems. Evidence to be bagged, witness statements to be scheduled. So terror could be translated into tasks I could do. When he arrived, he had an efficient knot of people. A tech with a backpack of devices. A photographer who moved like she cataloged memory and light. And Thomas himself with an expression that was somewhere between apology and apology postponed. We watched the files again together, slower this time, annotating and timestamping. The tech isolated the clips with the number 28 tag, July 18th and July 24th, and ran a playback at different speeds. "Tampered?" she asked softly. She had the tone of someone who had learned to ask without crushing hope. "No," the file reports. "Original. Untouched." We exported frames. We ran metadata. The camera was a consumer unit, placed hidden but not impossibly so. Someone who knew where to place it and how to retrieve film had been inside our house, watching a life we thought private. "Do we know who?" I asked, voice small. Thomas hesitated. "We can run clothing patterns, gait analysis," he said. "We can check the travel records for the dates attached. But this," he tapped the tin from the clip on the screen with a gloved finger. "This is the sort of thing that implies intention, not opportunism." Attention. Another word for a plan. For architecture. For the scaffolding of a truth hidden in plain things. I asked the tech if she could enhance the audio in the minutes surrounding that clip. We hadn't had microphones aimed directly at conversation. But buildings keep secrets. Pipes hum, floorboards sing in frequencies human ears dismiss. The enhanced audio captured a fragment, a single breath, and then, uncannily, an utterance that, when run through filters, resembled a name. Not my name. Another. A woman's name. Sarah? Nusra? I wasn't certain. The tech offered a professional shrug. "It's suggestive, not conclusive." Thomas said the work would take time. And it would. But courts often move faster than grief. He suggested a plan. A temporary injunction preventing any files from being removed from the home, establishing a chain of custody, and discreetly tracing the camera's purchase. We might be dealing with someone who had keys, he added. Or someone very comfortable letting themselves into rooms they didn't own. My mind supplied a dozen faces like a deck. Friends. A neighbor who borrowed sugar for an afternoon and never returned the pot? The housekeeper we'd had before James switched to a service? Or someone with a relationship to him that had worn an ordinary mask for years. Yet there was a movement in the footage that suggested clandestine tenderness, not violence. The way the hand smoothed the paper. The care in returning the tin. You don't treat someone you hate with that kind of gentleness. You treat them with the sharp economy of something you want to sever. We decided to retrieve the tin. Thomas had the bright confidence of a man whose job sat at the intersection of law and human drama. His voice made incursions into my courage. The tech cut the date-stamped clips onto a secured drive and sat with her face close to the screen, as if intimacy would coax truth out of pixels. That night I walked the corridor again. I mimed the steps, matching cadence to image. The house answered back with its same old quirks, but underneath the familiar there was now the shape of intent. A person had threaded themselves into our days. They had hidden something. They had folded a life into a metal container and pushed it into the spine of our home. Who hides? Who preserves someone else's piece of them behind your walls? At 2 a.m., I could no longer postpone the act. I moved the linen shelf, removed the panel, and reached with fingers that had forgotten dexterity. The tin was exactly where the footage had shown it. Warm to the touch, the varnish slightly tacky where a thumb had pressed. I slid it free and opened it on the kitchen table under the steady lamplight. Inside, a stack of photographs bound with a ribbon, a folded letter, and a small key with a tag that read in faded ink. For the room you never opened. Rehook. The house had been answering back, not with footsteps alone but with objects, with messages folded in metal, with invitations to go further. And every invitation came with a choice. Open or remain in the dark. I had already opened the drive. I had already accepted that answer's cost. Now a tin on my kitchen table held the next currency. The proof of a life secreted away inside my husband's rooms. I sat down. The ribbon trembled in my hands. Outside, rain began again, steady and merciless. The sixth night did not arrive so much as seep in. The way cold dampness finds the seams of an old house and makes a home there. I prepared like a skeptic playing at ritual. Phone at 30% and charging from a silent battery pack. Flashlight tested twice. Fresh batteries in the voice recorder. A string of painter's tape laid in crosshatches across the locked hallway door so I could see, at a glance, if anything displaced even a millimeter. I told myself it was data gathering, not dread management, but my hands trembled anyway as I pressed the last strip flat. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if pennies had dissolved in the vents. Somewhere inside the walls the boiler exhaled, and the old house settled into its familiar pre-midnight hush. I took my place on the stairs with my back to the newel post, the way a diver braces before a drop, and I waited for the footsteps that had redrawn the map of my nerves. They came at 12:17 a.m., right on the cruel schedule my notes had documented. 3 soft steps, a long drag as though someone shifted weight and tested the floorboard, then 2 quicker footfalls that always stopped at the same plank beneath the smoke alarm. This time, though, there was a 4th step, tiny, almost apologetic, like a decision made at the edge of a cliff. The painter's tape twitched. I didn't breathe. The lock did not turn, but the door answered back in a language of wood. A low, aching whine. The sound of grain remembering the mold it took shape in. The voice recorder's red light blinked. I spoke into it without lifting my eyes from the tape. Night 6. Deviation in pattern. Additional step. Pressure at door seam. Temperature drop present. I could see my breath, thin vapor ribboning in the stairwell. And I caught the absurd thought that maybe the house was exhaling a story it hadn't been allowed to tell. Hook again. I pressed my palm against the runner to ground myself and stood. Every instinct said wait for daylight, wait for backup. Wait for any reality less brittle than this one. Instead, I slid the spare key into the deadbolt and left it vertical, unturned, like a truce flag. If you belong to this house, I said softly, not quite a prayer. I'm listening. The footsteps did not resume. The silence did. It gathered itself in the corners and under the stair treads, and in the distance between heartbeat and thought. I clicked on the flashlight and sent a soft beam to the threshold. The tape grid looked undisturbed except for one strand that had a shallow U in the middle, the way paper bows when breathed upon. I photographed everything, squared the frame, and then, because fear has a way of disguising itself as caution, I forced my hand to the key and turned. The deadbolt retracted with a click so loud it felt obscene. The door eased inward 2 inches. No one stood there. No draft pushed past. The flashlight's beam painted the hallway in a washed-out cone. Closed doors, the runner rug, the picture frames glinting like thin-boned fish along a dark river. The smell changed, less copper, more clay, and beneath it, an unmistakable trace of something antiseptic, like the ghost of a hospital corridor. I stepped across the threshold and, like always, the house recalibrated around me. Its silence was no longer passive. It watched. At the third board, my board, the one I had mapped by sound and step, the wood spoke again, a compressed sigh. I crouched and lifted the runner by its hem. The plank beneath had been scored in a tight rectangle. The cuts old and careful, the edges darkened by time and oil from hands. Not footsteps then. Not only footsteps. A hatch. Curiosity made a neat incision through the panic and kept widening it. I set the flashlight on its tail to throw a vertical column and worked my fingernails under the seam. It didn't budge. Of course it wouldn't. Secrets rarely cooperate. But the blade of my putty knife found purchase at the corner and levered the rectangle up 1/2 inch. Cold air, denser than the hallways, brushed my wrist. The antiseptic note sharpened. I slid the panel free and laid it aside like a lid removed from a story that wouldn't stop. Beneath, a cavity the size of a bread box. Inside, for items precise and improbable, a brass hotel bell tarnished to the green of old statues, a child's canvas sneaker clean as a promise, a cassette tape labeled in block letters "Do Not," and a modern keycard sealed in a transparent sleeve printed with the logo of a long-shuttered psychiatric facility 40 miles away. Rehook. My breath developed its own tremor. I touched nothing for a count of 10, then 20. The bell's ringer had a fleck of white paint on it, as if it had lived under drywall dust. The sneaker's sole showed no grit. The keycard had a hairline cracked down one side like a lightning strike frozen in plastic. I reached for the cassette last. Its spools held a full belly of tape. The label's ink had bled at one corner as though a single tear had landed, and then thought better of itself. Night 6, contents of subfloor cache documented. I whispered, voice thin. Bell shoe cassette keycard. Possible link to closed facility. Saying the words did not make them smaller. I didn't hear the next sound so much as register it in my bones. A bell's single bright note, struck somewhere not here but very near here, echoing through ductwork or memory. The brass bell in the cavity had not moved. I placed the cassette back as gently as if it were breathing. The flashlight's beam faltered, battery not dead but wanting. And I understood then that fear wasn't the only thing timing my night. I reseated the hatch, smoothed the runner, and backed toward the threshold, every step measured like a penitence. At the door, something made me look right. The last frame on the wall, sepia, a man in a suit I'd never met. Hung at a tilt that wasn't there before. Nobody's. No tremor. Just the afterimage of a hand that wanted me to notice it had been there. In the safer light of the kitchen, I laid the 4 objects on a towel and photographed them like evidence, because that's what they were. A search for the hospital's name pulled 3 results. A century of scandal distilled to an architectural shell and a cautionary tale. Closed after a series of investigations. Records sealed. Urban explorers warned off by fences and fines. I stared at the keycard and felt heat rise where logic said cold should be. Someone had linked this house to that corridor. Someone wanted the path between them to exist. The bell vibrated in the photograph. No, of course it did not, but my eyes insisted it wouldn't stop ringing. I almost texted Mara then. Almost typed, "You were right, it's not in my head." But some strand of self-preservation pulled taut. Whatever this was, it had turned intimate. It was speaking to the house and now, through it, to me. I pressed the recorder and said, Night 6 concludes with a map I didn't consent to own. Then I did the most reckless, necessary thing I've done since this started. I took the cassette to the old stereo in the den, slid it in and pressed play. For 2 seconds, nothing. Then a hallway came out of the speakers, the exact acoustic footprint of mine. Footsteps soft as breath and a voice I recognized because it was my own, only tired and older and trying not to break. If you're hearing this, you've found what I couldn't say out loud. The house listened with me, doors holding their breath, stairs refusing to creak, the night bending its head to hear the rest. The tape hissed like static rain before the voice continued. My voice, fragile and strained, as though it had traveled years just to reach this moment. If you're hearing this, it means the house woke up again, and you need to get out before it remembers you. The sound filled the den, and suddenly every lamp, every creaking beam, seemed to lean in closer to listen. My skin prickled. The tone on the recording wasn't just weary, it was terrified. I froze, halfway between disbelief and the sinking, physical certainty that whatever had happened in this house before was still happening. Only now it wanted me involved. I pressed pause, then play again. The tape resumed, this time with a faint rhythmic tapping underneath the words, like footsteps, or maybe something trying to mimic them. The recorded me whispered. He built the walls thicker for a reason, not to keep people out, to keep what's inside from getting free. The air in the room shifted, colder now, tight around my throat. I looked down at the cassette deck. The reels were spinning, but the counter had stopped. That shouldn't have been possible. The words were still playing, still unfolding, still addressing me directly. If you move toward the hallway door, the recording said, it will know. It listens for weight, not sound. Hook. I didn't want to test it, but curiosity is a kind of gravity. It drags you whether you resist or not. I stood slowly, each joint a warning bell, and took one measured step toward the hallway. The floor stayed silent, but from somewhere deep in the structure came a faint, deliberate creak, like something shifting its balance in response. The stereo crackled. My voice on the tape laughed, but it wasn't a sound of amusement. It was relief, the broken kind that comes when a secret confirms itself. You've already been inside the wall, the recording said. You just don't remember leaving it. The world tilted. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. The lights flickered, once, twice, and when they steadied, I saw movement near the base of the hallway door, dust swirling upward, as if drawn by invisible footsteps. Every instinct screamed run, but the rational part of my mind, the one that still believed in tape recorders and electricity and logic, made me pick up the phone instead. I dialed Mara. No signal. Not even static. Rehook. The voice on the tape began humming a tune I half remembered. Something my husband used to whistle absent-mindedly when he worked late building this very house. A chill crawled from my spine to my jaw. He built this house for us, I whispered aloud, the old phrase now poisoned with new weight. But what if he didn't finish it alone? The tape stopped. The reel spun backward on its own, rewinding fast, until it jammed with a snap. I ejected it. The magnetic strip had twisted like something resisting its own undoing. And then came the footsteps again, this time from inside the wall to my left, slow and deliberate, following the rhythm of the humming I had just heard. I stumbled back, flashlight shaking in my hand. Who's there? The sound stopped immediately, obedient, almost polite. Then 3 knocks answered, sharp and evenly spaced. Not a plea. A signal. I pressed my palm to the plaster where the sound had come from. The wall felt warm. Breathing warm. There was a faint vibration under my fingertips. Not mechanical, not the hum of a pipe or wire. It was pulse-like. I remembered the old blueprints I'd found in the drawer weeks ago. The hallway had been added after the house was first built, an extension, an afterthought. My husband had overseen it himself. Why add a hallway? I murmured. That leads nowhere. The air shuddered in response, the faintest echo of my own words returning from behind the wall. Nowhere. My flashlight flickered again. I turned toward the stairs, and froze. The photograph that had tilted the night before now lay shattered on the floor. Behind the glass, instead of the unknown man's face, there was a negative, a ghostly print, of me, standing at that exact spot, hand on the wall, mouth open as if mid-sentence. The hallway door creaked open an inch on its own, though I had locked it. The key rested on the table where I'd left it. The sound that came next wasn't footsteps. It was breathing. Slow, careful, deliberate breathing that matched my own until I realized it was one count behind, always arriving half a second late. I stepped backward, heart hammering, and whispered, "You don't belong here." From the hallway, a low voice, identical to mine, replied, "Neither do you." The lights went out. When the lights came back, they didn't blink or flare. They pulsed, like veins rediscovering a heartbeat. Every bulb in the house hummed on a low frequency, a sound that made my teeth ache. The air had shifted again, thicker, slower, as if the house were filled with water instead of air. I could taste copper. My name echoed in the silence, not from any throat, but from the walls themselves. I tried the door to the outside. It didn't move. The knob turned, but the wood felt fused to the frame, like the whole structure had decided I wasn't allowed to leave. I slammed my shoulder into it once, twice, a third time, nothing. The sound it made wasn't wood on wood. It was bone. The stereo in the den clicked. The cassette, which I had ejected and left on the table, now sat inside the player again. The reel spun backward, the tape feeding itself into the machine. Then came that voice, my husband's voice, low, steady, and heartbreakingly calm. "If you're hearing this, Anna, I didn't mean for it to wake up again. I thought I sealed it away." My breath caught. His voice filled every inch of the house, curling through the vents, vibrating through the floorboards. "What did you seal?" I whispered. The voice continued, overlapping with itself, like multiple recordings layered imperfectly. "The walls. They remember the ones who died here. They echo them. I thought it was the house's fault. But it was never the house. It was me." Hook. Something thudded upstairs, rhythmic, steady. Footsteps again. But these were heavier, slower. Not the phantom pacing of a restless echo. These belonged to someone who knew I was listening. I crept toward the staircase, flashlight beam trembling across the wallpaper. The pattern there, an intricate motif of vines and spirals, had begun to change. I could swear the lines were moving, rearranging themselves into shapes that resembled letters. I leaned closer. The vines spelled out a word that shouldn't have been possible. Stay. Rehook. The steps above me stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Then in the stillness, a small voice, not my husband's this time, a child's, whispered my name. "Anna." I froze. The sound came from the locked hallway. My hand tightened around the flashlight, and I forced myself forward, every step an argument between reason and instinct. The door stood slightly ajar again, though I had seen it closed not a minute ago. The light from my torch stretched into the darkness beyond, and something moved. A shadow, small and quick, retreating just out of view. Inside, the hallway was colder than before. Frost formed along the edges of the picture frames, the air shimmering faintly as if alive. I followed the sound of soft breathing to the end of the corridor, where the runner rug had been pushed aside. The hatch I'd uncovered earlier now lay open. A dim glow rose from the cavity below. Against every screaming instinct, I knelt and looked inside. The brass bell and the cassette were gone. In their place sat a stack of photographs, a dozen at least, curled at the edges and spotted with age. The top photo showed me, standing by the very wall where I knelt now. My expression was blank, my eyes unfocused, as though I'd been caught mid-sleep. Beneath that, another photo, older, showing my husband in the same position, hand on the same wall, the same expression. Beneath that, a woman I didn't know. Then another. And another. Each face more faded than the last. The final photograph at the bottom wasn't aged at all. It was glossy, recent, taken from over my shoulder, capturing me holding the photo stack. I dropped the pictures. They scattered like trapped birds. The whisper returned, right at my ear this time, so close it brushed my skin. "You woke it up." I spun around. The hallway was empty, but the air wasn't still. The house breathed. I could hear the inhale in the floorboards, the exhale through the vents. The light flickered again, once, twice, and in the dark between those blinks, I saw something. A shape. A figure standing at the far end of the hallway. It looked like my husband, but taller, stretched thin like a shadow pressed against reality. Michael, I whispered. The figure tilted its head, as if amused by the name. Then it smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just wide enough to reveal that it understood what the name meant to me. I ran. Down the stairs, through the den, past the humming lights. The front door still locked. I grabbed the key card from the table, the one from the psychiatric hospital, and as soon as my fingers closed around it, the house stopped breathing. A silence so deep it felt physical wrapped around me. Then slowly from behind me, his voice, said, "You were never supposed to see the door beneath the floor." The bulbs exploded all at once. The blast of light left a ringing in my ears that didn't fade when the darkness returned. The smell of burnt dust and ozone clung to the air. I couldn't see, but I could feel the house. Not its walls or floorboards, but the living, restless pulse beneath them. It was awake now. Fully. I stumbled toward the nearest light switch. When I flipped it, nothing happened, only the faint echo of a click traveling through the walls, like the sound of a throat swallowing. Then came a whisper. Not from behind me. From below. The floor vibrated under my feet, and with every pulse, the wooden boards flexed, separating by fractions of an inch. Through those cracks, I saw a faint golden glow. Not like light. Like fire, or memory. Hook. I dropped to my knees, running my hands over the seams. The boards were hot to the touch. Then, with a sudden groan, one of them snapped loose, revealing what my husband had called the foundation chamber. Except it wasn't a basement. It was a tunnel, narrow, spiraling downward, carved directly into the stone. There was a sound rising from below. Faint, rhythmic, like breathing filtered through machinery. I should have run. Instead, I grabbed the flashlight and climbed down. The deeper I went, the more the air changed. It smelled of iron and earth and something faintly sweet, formaldehyde maybe. The tunnel curved into a small chamber lit by a single bare bulb. Underneath it stood a wooden chair and an old reel-to-reel recorder, still spinning even though it wasn't plugged in. A single tape sat beside it, labeled in my husband's handwriting, Test 7, Subject A. I pressed play. "The memory anchors are holding," his voice said. "She doesn't remember the first cycle. Good. We can start again." My breath caught in my throat. If she hears the footsteps too early, it means the house is rebuilding too fast. It's learning. Next time, I'll move the recording equipment upstairs. The tape hissed, then a second voice entered. My own. "Michael, please. I don't want to forget again." The reel stuttered, rewound slightly, and repeated that last line. "Michael, please. I don't want to forget again." Rehook. The words twisted until they were overlapping, growing louder with each repetition. I covered my ears, but the sound didn't come from the speaker anymore. It came from inside my head. The chamber pulsed in rhythm with the voice. On the far wall, a shape began to form, a dark outline of a door. I stepped closer. It wasn't painted. It was burned into the stone, its edges glowing faintly. And carved above it were words I recognized instantly, because I had written them in my diary years ago. "We only forget what we can't forgive." The handle was metal, ice cold to the touch. I hesitated, every instinct screaming not to open it. Then I heard it, the faintest sob, a child's cry, muffled by distance. "Anna," the voice whispered again. But this time, it wasn't the house. It was a memory. I pulled the handle. The door opened inward to reveal a small, windowless room. In the center stood a crib, old wooden, covered in dust. Inside lay a single folded blanket. And beneath it, a photograph. I lifted it slowly. It was of a baby, a girl, maybe a year old. My handwriting was scrawled on the back, Eleanor. My pulse quickened. We'd never had a child. I would have remembered. Wouldn't I? The tape recorder clicked off. Then my husband's voice, one last time, whispered through the chamber. Faint shaking, close enough to feel. "I tried to erase her so you wouldn't remember what happened that night." The light flickered. The ground trembled. And from somewhere deep beneath the floor, the sound of small footsteps began, slow, steady, coming closer. I stumbled backward, flashlight flickering wildly. The tunnel behind me had closed. The stone walls were breathing. Every inch of the room pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't mine. The crib creaked once, and then I heard it, a child's giggle. The blanket began to rise. The blanket floated just high enough to reveal a pair of tiny footprints burned into the dust beneath the crib. I backed away, but the room was shrinking, the walls breathing inward, pulsing in rhythm with that faint giggle that now echoed through the tunnel. The light bulb above me swung violently, throwing long, warped shadows that danced like figures on a stage. Eleanor. I whispered. My own voice sounded foreign, like someone speaking through water. A soft hum answered, a lullaby, one my husband used to sing when we couldn't sleep. Except this voice wasn't his. It was smaller, fragile, older than it should have been. The blanket dropped back into the crib, and the music box on the shelf began to play by itself. I hadn't noticed it before, a tiny porcelain dancer twirling in slow, jerky movements. The melody was warped, dragging at the edges like something alive trying to breathe through the notes. Mommy. The word froze the air. It came from the corner of the room, from the shadows themselves. I turned the flashlight, and there she was. A little girl no older than 6, dressed in white, her eyes too wide and too familiar. Hook. She looked exactly like the child from the photograph. Like me. Her mouth trembled. He said you'd forget, she whispered. But I waited. I waited so long. The flashlight flickered again, dimming as the sound of footsteps filled the chamber. Heavier this time, coming down the tunnel behind me. My heart hammered. I turned toward the sound, but the child's voice grew louder, more urgent. Don't let him close it again. Rehook. I spun back, but she was gone. The crib stood empty once more, the music box still turning. And then the tunnel filled with light. My husband emerged from the glow, or what was left of him. Not ghost, not memory, but a distorted echo of flesh and shadow. His eyes shimmered like wet glass. Anna, he said, calm, almost pleading. You weren't supposed to see her. What did you do? I shouted, voice breaking. I tried to fix it, he said softly. You couldn't live with what happened. The fall. The sound of her crying. You wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. So I built the walls thicker. I buried the sound. I thought if the house carried the memory, you wouldn't have to. The realization hit like a physical blow. The footsteps, the voice, the locked doors. None of it was the house trying to scare me. It was trying to remind me. She died here. I whispered. Didn't she? He nodded once, eyes shining. She fell. You ran to her, but it was too late. And then you broke. I built this place around your silence. The tapes, the loops, the resets. Each time you woke, I erased what hurt too much to bear. My knees gave way. And the others? The women in the photographs. They were all you, he said. Every version that forgot. The child's giggle returned, echoing from all directions now. The shadows twisted, and I saw her again, not the pale ghost, but the living memory of her. She stood between us, reaching out with tiny hands. Mommy, she said, voice soft but steady. It's time to wake up. The house groaned. The air filled with heat and light. My husband looked at me one last time, not in fear, but in acceptance. If you open the door, everything comes back, he said. But once you remember, there's no forgetting again. I reached for the handle. The metal burned, but I didn't let go. I've lived too long with nothing, I said. I'd rather live once with everything. The door opened. Light engulfed the room, blinding, all-consuming. The sound of the lullaby slowed, then reversed. The walls unraveled, and with them, the house itself began to dissolve, revealing not darkness, but sky. For a brief, impossible moment, I saw everything. The fall, the scream, the man building walls out of guilt, and the woman walking through them for years, searching for a child she'd already lost. When the light faded, the house was gone. I stood in an open field, the horizon washed in dawn. In the distance, a small hand slipped into mine, warm, real, alive. Eleanor. I whispered. She smiled. You remembered. And for the first time in years, I felt the air move freely. No walls, no echoes, no breathing house. Just the sound of the wind, and the weight of a memory finally set free.